So ESPN's Bill Connelly said something recently about Oregon State and Washington State getting into the Big 12. I have a question, though.
You are Locked On College Football, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your daily source to stay up to date with the biggest stories in the greatest sport on planet Earth: realignment, coaching carousel, the portal, and more. We've always got you covered. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions do apply. Florida could get noisy in the transfer portal, and Texas got a little noisy, and I really like what the Longhorns have done. We'll talk about that coming up on today's show. Couple of SEC schools there. Don't forget. So let's talk Big 12, though, because Bill Connelly was on 1080 The Fan recently and was asked about the prospect of Oregon State and Washington State finding their way into the Big 12 one day. And he said, you know, it's a possibility. It's something that could come about. He also discussed what I've mentioned many a times, which is rebuilding the Pac-12 into the premier Group of Five conference in the country in a couple of years' time, with teams from the Mountain West, an American or a full Mountain West, lots of options there. But he mentioned the Big 12, which is certainly the long-term goal for Oregon State and Washington State. I think even more than the ACC, because which conference feels more stable right now? It's the Big 12. It feels crazy to say for a conference that is about to lose its two biggest brands, but that's the reality of realignment here. And Brett Yormark deserves a lot of credit for the way he's navigated the landscape. But Connelly said, well, you know, the Big 12 feels like they would go into a 32-team conference if everything aligned right. Whoa, 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 whoa. Hey, easy. 32? They're not even at 20 yet. Next year, they're going to have 16. Where... Hey, what? Excuse me? So I saw that and just thought to myself, boy, that escalated quickly. I mean, that really got out of hand fast. 32 just suddenly doubling. Connelly did not go into details, at least in the article that I was reading about this, with regards to how they would get there. But if you're Oregon State and Washington State and you hear that and think, we got a path to the Big 12, the path is there. Let's not pin our hopes on a 32-team conference, because that is not something that is materializing anytime soon. If they're going to get, I mean, that's the largest conference I've seen proposed anywhere. I presume that would be some sort of full-on merger with the ACC. If Florida State, like, that probably comes about if Florida State, Clemson, and then like North Carolina and, I don't know, Virginia, somebody, or NC State, if they wind up in the SEC and or the Big Ten, and then the ACC crumbles and teams are left with nowhere to go, then perhaps the Big 12 would get there. But here's the other thing that stood out to me about this. All this stuff gets suggested or thrown out, which I talk about regularly on the show. We haven't even seen or felt or experienced the new conferences yet. And that's one of the things that bugs me about college football playoff expansion. Well, let's get to 14 teams in a couple of years. Like, can we just see what 12 is like? Can we just understand how this works and what the criteria are and how we think this functions best for college football? Can we do that before we just start looking ahead over and over? But this is the nature of the beast. This is the way realignment and expansion works, as I've said many times before. I don't know how it stops. I had a conversation with someone on the golf course the other day about realignment and whatnot. I was with my brother, actually, and he said, do you think realignment's going to stop? And I said, no. I don't, because in a couple of years, you're going to have the Pac-12 to make a decision. In 2027, you've got the look-in clauses on the Big 12's deal with ESPN and Fox, and the ACC's deal with ESPN. But we don't even know what the next dominoes are, which are Florida State and Clemson. Like, we have an idea of what it could be. But anyway, I digress here. To bring this back to the Beavs and the Cougs, who I have been an adamant supporter of as it pertains to their being in a Power 4 conference and deserving to be in a Power 4 conference. They absolutely do. This idea of getting to the Big 12 can happen one day, but it's not in this round. It's not. The next move for these schools is not to get into the Big 12, because even if Florida State and Clemson leave, I think the ACC tries to hold on at least for a couple of seasons. If you can keep Miami and North Carolina and Duke and NC State, I think you can do enough. I definitely left out Miami when mentioning potential teams to go into the Power Conference a moment ago, and I'm sure people are already mad at me in the comment section, but I'm just like spitballing hypotheticals. I'm not getting super serious about that right now, just to be clear. But anyway, so I think if you're Oregon State, Washington State, you can't bank on that. You have to be thinking short term, and that can feel unsettling because the future is, number one, a long ways away, but number two, it folds out in a way that is impacted by what takes place in the present. And I think it can be unsettling if you're an Oregon State or Washington State fan listening to or watching this and thinking to yourself, what, we just don't think about the future? No, you can't. You can't. And that stinks because you want to know, you want to have an idea, you want to have a plan, you want to have a long-term solution to get into the Big 12 or the ACC one day. But you can't control everything that takes place there because there is no guarantee. You can't guarantee a couple of things. Number one, you cannot guarantee that the ACC splinters a la the Pac-12 if Florida State and Clemson depart. You cannot guarantee that that happens, which is how you would get to a place where they'd say, yeah, okay, let's include Oregon State and Washington State because we need a West Coast pod along with Stanford and Cal. So that's number one. And then number two, you can't guarantee, even if the ACC does break apart, that the Big 12 is going to go all the way up to 32. That's an astronomically high number. I don't know if Connelly with that number is thinking about teams like Boise State and Fresno State at the G5 ranks, which certainly could be Big 12 fits one day, especially Boise and Fresno. I could see that. San Diego State, also a Power 4 capable university out there from an athletic standpoint. Their men's basketball team, of course, was recently in the national title game a couple of years ago. So I just was so thrown off guard when I saw just this casual inclusion of, yeah, well, if they go to a 32-team conference, like 32 feels like an AFC, NFC number. In fact, that is, I think there are 64 teams in the NFL. I could be wrong, but no, there are 32, 16 apiece. But that feels like the mega conference scenario in which none of these conferences exist, which is a really hard place to get to. When people have money, power, and influence, really hard to get them to give up those things. Would it be in the best interest of the sport? Yes. Yes, it would. But are you going to get to those mega conferences? Not right now. Not right now. Later, one day, in the future, down the road, perhaps. I don't see any conference going over the low 20s at this point in time. So 32 feels like a stretch. So if you're an Oregon State or Washington State fan and you saw this or heard the radio here, whatever, and you thought to yourself, oh, we could have a path to the Big 12. Yes, but that's a ways away. It is not going to happen quickly. I know you all do it anyway. I'll just suggest it just for the fun of it. Drop your thoughts in the YouTube comments or hit me up on X, formerly known as Twitter, at @SMcLaughlinCFB. The transfer portal, yeah, it's still a thing, still hanging around. Might get busy down in Gainesville. Before we get to the Gators, let's get to our friends at LinkedIn. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just a job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. That's why over 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Is Florida about to make noise in the transfer portal? Brandon Olsen, Locked On Gators, joining me to discuss. Are the Gators the front runners for Colorado former 5-star Cormani McClain?
I want to say, yeah. Let me tell you, if you'd have asked me when Cormani McClain hit the portal, if Florida was going to be in play at all, I would have told you no. Because the moment he hit the portal, I had people from Florida tell me that kid burned so many bridges. And so I would have just written him off right away. But yeah, the front runners right now to land preferred walk-on cornerback, Cormani McClain.
Is that what he would be at Florida?
He would be a preferred walk-on.
That's pretty crazy.
Yeah, that'd be insane. I think that part of it is he does not have much interest outside. From what I've heard, a lot of his interest is from Florida A&M and Memphis. Not exactly powerhouse teams there. And it's also, I think, part of just Florida's at 85 scholarships. Make him earn it. Like a little humility play there. But yeah, the expectation is that if Cormani McClain is a Florida Gator, it'll be as a preferred walk-on.
Which is wild for a former 5-star recruit. Now, in the NIL era, of course, his school can still get paid for. And there are schools that do this all across the country. But this is a guy who does not currently have the most sparkling reputation. Deion Sanders was not speaking glowingly about him. I think that's part of the reason that Cormani ended up ditching the Buffs and is looking for a new home. And I think that element of, hey, we want to see you put in the time, demonstrate the work ethic necessary to be a high-level college football player, which we all know he's capable of being, but he's just got to find the right spot. I think that incentive, like, we'll put you on scholarship if you showcase these things, I think that could work out. But do you see him as a guy, if he came on as a PWO and would he play? Would he be a reserve guy? What would he do at Florida that, he maybe would or would not also do over at a Florida A&M, a Memphis, or South Florida?
So I went on about a half an hour rant on today's episode, just basically saying that Cormani McClain, when he was in high school, I said this before he committed anywhere, even when I thought he was going to commit to Florida, I said, he's not very good. He just has physical traits that, like, you can't teach. And that's why he was a 5-star. You can't teach that length and that height and that speed, just like all in one person. And I didn't think he was ready to play college football right away. And then he went to Colorado. And when he did play, wasn't good. He allowed 22 almost yards per catch. It was like 18 for 25 passing, which is like completions allowed, which is just terrible. He had all the rumors about, not even rumors, just his head coach just straight up saying, hey, he's not going to practice. He's not going to meetings. He's not doing any of these things right. It's just really hard for me to say that a kid who struggled in the Pac-12 last year, struggled to do the right things, is going to be ready and play arguably the toughest schedule that we've seen in college football, maybe ever, at least at a very long time. It's tough for me to say that he's going to be able to come in and contribute at a quality level. And that's just where we are with him. I think I liken him to when a team takes a project on day 3 of the NFL draft, very late, 7th round.
I like that.
Yeah, very little capital investment in him. Know that if he hits, can be a superstar, but don't get your hopes up.
Let's look elsewhere in the portal for Florida, because they have certainly poked and prodded. There are a lot of players still in the transfer portal. I think hundreds, if not, I don't know what the exact number is of players available, but there are still a lot of starting caliber guys out there. The guy who is yet to find a home is Elijah Badger, who I think is the most singularly impactful player available in the transfer portal, because I think if he goes to the right situation, Brandon, he can be a wide receiver 1 at the power 4 level. This guy is that good, and he's looked at a couple different spots. Arizona, which would be close to where he's coming from, that being Arizona State. Washington, a place that he has visited as well, and Florida. Now, last time you and I talked transfer receivers on the show with regards to the Gators, it was about Keandre Lambert-Smith, and they didn't end up landing him. He chooses Auburn instead. Are they going to be able to get Elijah Badger?
I think that as long as his medicals check out, Florida's in a really good spot to land him. Right now, that back is kind of what's holding him back here. But if his medicals check out, which I'm not super optimistic about, just because Florida historically is very conservative with clearing kids medically. If his medicals check out, I expect him to be a Florida Gator. I'm just gonna be honest here. I think Florida's swinging, and if his medicals check out, I think they're in a really good spot to land him. I think you do have a really good selling point with him and Billy Napier of just going, hey, I just coached an Arizona State transfer that went in the first round of the NFL draft. Just saying, if you want to come here and do that, you can do that. And I think that Florida's in a really good spot to land Elijah Badger if his medicals check out.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said about what in the world was going on when Jaden Daniels and Elijah Badger and a number of others and Brandon IU and all these players rolled through Arizona State, and they didn't do that much winning. But that's perhaps an indictment on the prior coaching staff and administration over there in Tempe, not the current one. I think Dillingham can do a really, really good job in what is overall a somewhat tough situation. But the latest transfer that Florida did get, and I'm definitely keeping my eye on that Badger situation because I am really, really high on him if he's healthy. The Gators did land Jason Zandamela, who was a borderline 5-star recruit when he went to USC, and he's one of those guys that was a 2024 commit and enrollee at USC, goes through spring football, throws up the deuces to the team that's always throwing up the deuces at USC. See what I did there? I tried. And thank you, Brandon, for giving me credit for trying, because that's all I'm really looking for is external validation. But Zandamela comes over to Florida. Do you expect him to be a starter, or is this a guy who's maybe the center of the future for the Gators?
I look at him as the center of the future right now. I have a strict rule that Brian Smith will confirm every single time that he's on my show of we do not want an offensive lineman starting as a true freshman. It's just not something that you want, especially in the SEC. Like those interior defensive linemen, they wreck lives over there. You don't want a true freshman starting on the offensive line there. I think that having Jason Zandamela as your backup center in 2024 allows you to maybe push the current backup center and former guard, Rod Kearney, who's in his second year now, to guard and allow him to compete for that starting spot. So I think that Jason Zandamela makes an impact just indirectly right now.
Does it give you confidence about Napier and his staff at all that they were able to go and land someone who was a really highly touted recruit and a fairly highly coveted transfer portal target?
I'm gonna sound really like a hater here. I'm gonna say no, just because Jason Zandamela, when he hit the transfer portal, was very open that he wanted to be close to home in the state of Florida specifically. Options were slim there. So congratulations on landing him over any Florida school that did contact him. But Jason Zandamela said he wanted to be home or close to his, I guess, second home, because he's originally from Mozambique and then moved to Florida. So he wanted to be close to his second home in Florida. So you kind of started on third base there. You could say you hit a triple, but you started on third base there. And so as great as it is to land Jason Zandamela, UCF is a Power 4 program now, and they're making moves. You got Gus Malzahn as a fantastic.
They've made big moves in the transfer portal this offseason. A lot of really good moves.
And you beat him for Jason Zandamela, so that's awesome. But I don't think that it was as impressive as if you land an Elijah Badger, because that's across the country with no ties to you. And if you land him, then that's great. Jason Zandamela, also a great addition, but not one where I'm just like, Billy Napier's in his bag. He's doing everything possible. I'm not gonna lie to you like that. And but I do think it's a great ad still.
We appreciate the honesty as always. Brandon Olsen, Locked On Gators. Check him out on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you, good sir.
Thank you.
Some notable transfers have found homes, including, remember those defensive linemen that Texas lost to the NFL? They made a good move to replace them. That's coming up next. Before we talk Texas and other schools, let's talk FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. So FanDuel has also got everything you could possibly want with regards to college football, which is what this podcast is, of course, all about, because FanDuel lets you bet on over-under win totals, national championship odds, conference title odds, Heisman winners, individual games even. It's all over there. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every playoff shot count and get your college football gambling fix as well. FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, America's number one sportsbook and our official sportsbook sponsor here at the Locked On Network. Remember that time that Texas lost a couple of high-caliber interior defensive linemen to the NFL draft? I do. I was there for that. Full disclosure, I'm a Seahawks fan, and I like the Byron Murphy pick. I like it a lot. Anyway, those two guys were unsung heroes to the wide audience of college football fans in the country that led to Texas's rise, getting back to a national championship level and playing in the Sugar Bowl last year, ultimately falling to Washington. So I look at that as being a legitimate whole, and I look again at what they have done, and I love it. And I love the Jermayne Lole edition even more. So this is not the only defensive lineman that Texas has brought over. They hired as a co-defensive coordinator Johnny Nansen. Johnny Nansen was the defensive coordinator this past year at Arizona. So of course he brings with him Bill Norton, who comes over. Guy was really, really good for Arizona last year on the interior. Also brings over, I'm going to do my best to get this right. Here we go. We're going to try. Tiaoali Savea. I think I got it right. Maybe, possibly. I don't know. Two transfers come over from Arizona, and then Lole comes into the picture. Does anyone know how to pronounce his name correctly? I don't know, but that's the pronunciation that I've heard from those who have covered him. But what you need to know about this guy, 7th-year college football player. You heard me correctly. 7th-year college football player. Now, has Texas reloaded their defensive line with Lole and Norton and these other guys? You know, they got the 5-star edge, Colin Simmons, coming in. Is this going to be the same caliber defensive line? No. But what they have done here is, I think, minimize the drop-off. Because anytime you lose a first and a second round defensive tackle at the same time, it is darn near impossible to get the same production from that group. It is really, really challenging. I don't care what school, what program, what coach you are looking at. When you lose players that are taken in the first 2 rounds of the NFL draft, you're going to have a drop-off here. But Texas is doing a fantastic job. So in Jermayne Lole, they're getting a guy who played at Louisville this past year and does not put up numbers that blow you away. But you get a guy who has played a lot of college football, whose body is in shape, who plays at the Power 4 level, who belongs at that level, and is looking to find an extra gear that he hasn't shown in the last couple of years. So he made 12 appearances this past season for Louisville. He had just 1.5 sacks. His best season came a couple of seasons ago, several years ago at this point, at Arizona State. He had 6.5 sacks in that year. And Arizona State was a pretty darn good team, and he was a pretty darn good player for the Sun Devils at that time. So if you get him back to that sort of form, and you get Bill Norton to play the way that he's capable of, I look at this Texas defensive line and say, boom, done, solid, real good. Not high level, not carrying your defense, but not going to be a liability, not going to be a weakness, not going to be something that makes you go, oh man, I miss T'Vondre Sweat and Byron Murphy. Well, you're going to miss those guys at some level, but I really, really like this move. I really, really like these couple of moves for Texas here to solidify the defensive line, and I like Texas a lot. Their first year going in the SEC, I like them more than Oklahoma. And by the way, that's the icing on top of the Jermayne Lole cake for Texas fans. He was an Oklahoma verbal commit, flipped him over to the Longhorns. Doesn't hurt. Does not hurt. Now, Oklahoma landed Dominic Williams, and that was someone who Texas was going after. But this is the sort of move that you got to be able to pull off in the modern world of college football, because if you're not getting a guy of this caliber, somebody else is. And Oklahoma wanted him for a reason. Texas goes out and they get him. Dominic Williams goes to Oklahoma. Both parties probably happy at some level. Couple other transfer names to keep your eye on as the portal days progress, because there's still a lot of players in the transfer portal who are going to exit and find a new home. Gavin Meyer is another defensive lineman. Have not heard that Texas is necessarily involved there. Don't know that they would need to be, but he has heard from, or at least had conversations with, been linked to Wisconsin, USC, Cal, and Illinois. He's a 4-year player from the University of Wyoming. Over the last couple of years, he's totaled 65 tackles, 8.5 tackles for loss, 4 sacks. That's a pretty solid couple of seasons for an interior defensive lineman. I don't think you're getting a game wrecker here, but if you are lacking depth along the defensive line, I think Meyer can be that sort of player. And most interestingly, USC is involved. Now, Trojan fans, if you look on the correct message boards, are not thrilled with the way they have failed to recruit several defensive linemen to go play at USC. Cal is in the mix. Wisconsin's in the mix, which is where Meyer is from originally. Played at Wyoming for the last several years. Illinois in the mix. That's a very random assortment of Big Ten teams. Don't forget. Cal, of course, playing in the ACC. But I think that's a notable defensive line transfer name to watch right now. And defensive linemen have been really, really highly coveted. You saw Derek Harmon from Michigan State wind up at Oregon. His teammate, Simeon Barrow Jr., wound up at Miami. Miami had a former 4-star edge, Jaden Wayne, go to Washington. These guys have been really, really highly sought after, because the consensus, at least from what I've heard on a couple of different sites that cover recruiting in the transfer portal, is that defensive linemen at an elite level have been in kind of short supply. And so you're seeing these guys field a lot of offers, take their times. I don't know what the timeline is for Gavin Meyer to commit, but Wisconsin, USC, Cal, Illinois, all reportedly in the running there, and he's going to go and play. I don't know if he lines up and immediately becomes an all-conference caliber player in the Big Ten or the ACC. I know wherever he goes, he's going to have an opportunity to play, because like Jermayne Lole, the guy is not lacking for years in a weight room or time spent getting his body into game shape. He's already there. Just needs a new opportunity. Curious to see where he ends up. On the other side of the ball, in the trenches, Sidney Fugar. Interesting name here. So, guy who began his career at Western Illinois, 6'5", 325 pounds. And yeah, he plays offensive tackle. I know that's a big surprise to everybody. He's a big kid. He's a really big kid. Spent this past year at South Carolina. Didn't really find a home. Didn't establish a consistent role. But was at South Carolina for a reason. Because after starting for 9 games the prior year at Western Illinois, he's a guy that was drawing a good amount of attention. Shane Beamer and company brought him in. Did not quite work out. Washington has reportedly been involved here. He's already taken visits or had conversations with Colorado, of course, and UCLA. Both schools in the mix. Washington could use an offensive lineman. Had Roman Tomashoff of Locked On Huskies on the show last week. Offensive line is still a question mark, and they are looking to add names in the transfer portal, and Fugar feels like someone who's a little bit of a flyer in that you haven't seen him prove it consistently for a long period of time at the power level, but if you're able to kind of mold him with those physical traits, you could have something. Did not grade well on Pro Football Focus last year, did not have the season he was hoping for, but a fresh start, you never know what that can do for a guy. So, Gavin Meyer, the Wyoming defensive line transfer, Sidney Fugar, the South Carolina offensive line transfer, names to watch for in the portal. And as I mentioned, I really like what Texas did, adding Jermayne Lole, flipping him from Oklahoma. The Sooners get Dominic Williams. Guys are on the move. The portal, be portaling. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. And until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.